Good afternoon, listeners. We're super excited to bring you the second episode of the Plant Code podcast. I'm Max.
I'm Erik.
And if you didn't hear our first episode last week, we were talking about the dairy industry, the impact on your health, on the animals and the environment of dairy. The episode is called
Ethical Alcohol.
That's today.
Yeah, we decided to do this because we think that a lot of people actually are not aware of the fact that there are many forms of alcohol out there that are not vegan. So we decided to make a little episode here about, or more or less explaining to why it's not vegan and what is usually contained in a form of alcohol that is not vegan.
Excellent. Before we get into the deep and nitty-gritty of it, just want to mention, guys, everyone needs to drink responsibly.
Everyone needs to drink, but obviously everybody needs to drink responsibly.
Yeah, I mean, we're probably terrible people to say this, and those of you that
Sitting
know
and drinking
yeah, we are actually drinking vegan beer right now, but a lot of people die every year due to alcohol consumption, and I got an interesting statistic from the World Health Organization. In 2012, 3.3 million people died, and their death was attributed to alcohol consumption. So that's a lot, so take it seriously. But now let's get into the interesting part of the subject. The alcohols that contain animal products are mostly wine and beer, because they go through a process which is called fining. And there are non-vegan compounds that are used to fine the wine, such as isinglass, egg whites, casein, gelatin, and we're going to tell you a little bit more about these things because we've looked into it. And to be honest, I'd never heard of isinglass. I thought it was some Viking heaven. Oh. But it's not. It's a lot scarier than that. It's a fish bladder. And
which would be the absolute last thing that would come to mind when you think about
definitely. I mean,
a form of alcohol.
Yeah, it's not just one fish bladder that they use. Like they kind of mix them up together and they filter it through that. I'm not entirely sure of the process.
Initially, they also started doing that. I think they started off doing that with condoms as well.
What, filtering condoms?
Not filtering condoms, but they actually were using fish bladders to make condoms.
Wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't want to do that anyway. Well, maybe that'll be another episode. We can talk about that next
More
time.
about isinglass and fish bladders and the condom industry.
Even though sex and alcohol are often related.
They are.
But you should protect yourself.
Exactly. But once again, that's what we said in the beginning. Please drink responsibly and don't get yourself into any form of trouble.
Right. So, anyway, back to isinglass. Mainly used in beer, but also can be used in wine. And first of all, the reason they do this fining process is to remove particles and the haziness in alcoholic drinks, such as wine and the beer. People like to look through the glass, you have it clear, it's bright.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to have anything floating around there, because I think that removes the attraction.
Yeah, it puts people off. But whatever's in there is totally natural, and you can leave it as it is. There are unfined wines, unfined beers. They're slightly hazy, and they taste exactly the same. In the south of France, well, it's not the south really, the west of France, we should say. So they use egg whites, which is strange because I never thought anyone would use egg whites in wine, ever.
To be quite honest with you, it would have never crossed my mind that alcohol was not, like many forms of alcohol are not vegan. Stupid as I was and still am, it wouldn't cross my mind that they would use fish bladders or, like you said in this case, egg whites.
These winemakers are moving towards vegan options, and it's usually clay. They call it bentonite, which isn't kryptonite. Why are there so many references about superheroes and gods today? I don't know.
Yeah, it's something, I don't know. It's
should have my Superman t-shirt.
Exactly.
Anyway,
we're sitting next to the Vikings, maybe that's why.
Yeah. Anyway, the reason they use the egg whites is to remove the harshest tannins as well. So it's not just about fining and removing particles. It apparently enhances the taste because Cabernet Sauvignon is quite strong in tannins.
So the harshest tannin is usually, like, the harsher the tannin is, the darker the color is.
Yeah.
Thicker, maybe it was something like the thicker the tannin, but yeah, anyway, that's irrelevant.
And they also use gelatin, which I don't know which one scares me the most, to be honest. Egg whites, fish bladders, or gelatin.
For me, it's gelatin all the way, because if you think about what they're using, it's a protein that is obtained from the skin of an animal, or like tendons and the ligaments, bones.
It's like broth, basically.
Yeah,
like making a soup
from cows and pigs. And for me, if you ask me, I mean, any of them I would never really, I will never eat. But for me, gelatin is something that scares me away completely. I mean, they use it as well in cosmetics, shampoos. Oh yeah, obviously candy is probably where I've read about gelatin the most. And that was also like alcohol. For me, back in the days, for me, candy was like, oh yeah, candy can contain any form of animal products, can it? And then obviously when I started reading labels like, oh, this is suitable for vegetarians, and then I was like, why would the other things not be suitable for vegetarians?
Yeah, you're feeding your kid like boiled tendons and ligaments.
Yeah, and that's when
as a treat.
That's when it struck my mind. I'm like, okay. And then I started reading about gelatin, and then I was like, oh shit, this is actually animal fats. And when you started reading more deeply into this about being like tendons and livers, and that's just like, no, thank you.
Yeah, it's disgusting. I mean, there are more and more alternatives. I mean, we'll talk more about alcohol because that's what we're talking about. And I mentioned bentonite earlier, which is a clay-based fining agent, which is quite popular. And they also, some use activated charcoal, which apparently isn't the most used practice because it does remove a lot of flavor from the wine. But anyway, it's vegan, so we kind of support it, I suppose. Mm. And then there's the PVPP, which is polyvinyl polypyrrolidine. Never said that in my... I had no idea what that was.
I was like, you were looking at me and I was like, try to say it. I'm like, no. You continue on this one.
So I'm going to say it again. Polyvinyl polypyrrolidine.
Polyvinyl polypyrrolidine. No, I'm just going to stick to PVPP.
Yeah, I think that's what they call it anyway in the industry.
Yeah, that's it.
And I managed to say polyvinyl polypyrrolidine. No, I didn't. No, fuck it. Anyway, moving on.
PVPP.
So they do use that in certain white wines. Rosé as well, to kind of enhance the colour, remove some darkness from it. And also, interesting fact, and like we said, fining is not necessary, and a lot of winemakers choose to leave the wine in its natural state, and you'll often find that on the bottle it'll say unfined wine.
Well, like when you said like fining is not necessary, is it more of an economic perspective? Like you would say, I would like to speed up the process in order to save as much time as possible, or do you reckon
it's aesthetical as well?
Yeah.
So there's kind of the two reasons. In the end product of wine and beer, there generally is only a traceable content of the animal product, but we don't support it because it's in the process, because they're still using it. And a lot of people confuse organic wines with vegan wines, but it's not the same thing.
That's something as well for food. I think is also a lot of people be like, oh yeah, but this is organic, and for a lot of people, organic also means vegan. But that's just the fact that people actually don't know what vegan is or organic, or neither they know what organic is.
I mean, organic wine just means they don't use chemical fertilizers. It doesn't mean they don't use animal products.
Gelatin,
because some of them consider that animal products are natural, so it is organic as well.
Right.
It's a completely different philosophy, which isn't ours.
No.
So how can we find out if a wine is vegan?
It's becoming, I think, easier because from the times where I've gone and picked out my bottles of wine from the shelf, I haven't really looked on an honest side if the wine is vegan. But there are more and more labels out there that are stating if wines are vegan.
It's a good selling point as well in today's world because veganism is...
You're adding another market to it. Yeah, it wouldn't hurt. And even if you're not vegan and you would want to go buy a wine, and if you see, oh, this is a nice bottle, and it says it's vegan friendly, I would be shocked if someone would be like, oh, this is vegan, I won't buy that.
Oh, I'd rather have one that has gelatin in it.
But the thing is, there are people, they don't really know much about it.
We didn't know much about this. I mean,
exactly.
Let's be honest. And what's also interesting, what I find, is that there are no laws about labeling ingredients in wine, especially in the US, for example, and I think it's mainly because there are so many ingredients in wine, and it probably would put off people. They use a lot of...
They need like a separate booklet for the wines itself.
But when you look at food, everything in food now, you have to have the ingredients. And what's interesting is, since 2012, they have to declare allergens, and as egg, milk, they are allergens if they're above a prescribed level.
That should be,
Yeah, then they have to mention it. But if you have any doubts about... whether or not a wine or beer is vegan, you can Google it first of all. And there's an amazing website called barnivore.com where they have an extensive...
Rest assured as well, like these lists are becoming greater and greater by every single day. I mean, they're adding more and more. And most of the winemakers are starting to add labels with the fact that it says vegan or not. But I extracted this from the European Commission regulations, and they state for any alcoholic beverages only requires a complete list of ingredients on an alcoholic beverage. So let's say the bottle or the can itself, with a strength by volume of 1.2% or less. So if it's above that, you don't need to mention anything what is contained, meaning that only low or non-alcoholic beer, wines and ciders have to have a list of all their ingredients.
Because even most beers, it's like at least 4%, 5%.
Yeah, so I mean... You would need to get a really, really weak beer in order to find all the ingredients that it contains. But yeah, I mean, like we said, I think it's becoming more and more prevalent that we're finding wines that are vegan and it's being labeled. I went to Germany actually, and there's an extensive collection where wines are labeled as vegan, which is great because it gives you and me a peace of mind.
And for those of you like the stronger stuff, for example, spirits, this is a bit easier because most spirits are vegan anyway because they don't go through a refining process. The whole process is different. We're not here to teach you how to make wine, beer, or spirits. We're just trying to help you
choose.
Yeah, help you choose better. So,
but we're not telling you to drink. That's your own choice. But once again,
yeah, if you do,
responsibly.
Be responsible in all ways.
Yeah.
Unless a spirit is, for example, fortified with honey or it's a cream based, then obviously it's not going to be vegan because honey isn't vegan, by the way. There will be another episode of this podcast about honey.
We said that we were going to go more in depth about honey because that's another grey area in the vegan culture, I'd say.
The interesting one's cognac as well because people confuse cognac and whiskey. We're getting a lot in depth into the alcohol here.
But we're good at this.
Yeah, we like it.
I feel like this is an ongoing... this could be probably an episode 2 hours.
Because cognac is actually made from wine, and the wine grapes that are used in cognac, they're not clarified and don't go through a refining process, so they are vegan, so drink your cognac, people.
Yeah, interesting fact about the cognac, but there is another liquor that I'd like to highlight. It's that bright fluorescent red bottle of Campari, and initially where it derived or where it started off from how it got its color is because they used a coloring agent that came from dried crushed insect bodies, especially from the pregnant female, because that was apparently the most fluorescent type. And this was called the cochineal, or another word for Greek as probably as it is Max, give it a try.
Dactylopius coccus.
Coccus, yeah. So this was initially the ingredient that they started using.
Sounds like a flying dinosaur.
Maybe it was. I mean, dinosaur wasn't an insect.
True.
But anyway, so this was initially their main ingredient when it got its color. But now more and more countries around the world are using alternative ingredient to make it vegan friendly. But there were some places, from my country especially, it's still not vegan because they use another form.
That's Sweden.
That's yeah. Well, we haven't actually gotten a chance to introduce ourselves. We probably have a separate...
We've got more important stuff to talk about than ourselves.
Exactly. And by the time we actually start introducing us, it probably would leave the podcast. But anyway.
An interesting point about that, a lot of alcohols are produced differently in different places in the world. So it's important to check the origin of where the alcohol you're consuming is being produced. Because a lot of spirits are distilled in different places. For example,
different regulations.
Yeah. In Campari in Jamaica, for example, they still use an egg compound in it. Yeah. And like you said, in Sweden, they still use this
coloring of the insects.
Anyway,
do you dare to say the word again? Dactylopius coccus.
Dactylopius coccus. Anyway, before we wrap this up, I think, as we've talked a lot about responsible things, we need to talk a little bit about the impact that the alcohol industry does have on the environment today. So let's be honest, alcohol is not necessary to human survival.
Totally is necessary. What are you talking about?
It's necessary for survival in society, but for survival as in bodily functions, it is not necessary.
It's not necessary.
So a big argument behind the environmental impact is that there's a lot of resources that are being used and wasted in a sense that could be diverted for better causes such as aid and food around the world, because alcohol production uses a lot of water, a lot of energy, fertilizers, grains, time. And if you think about just the transport of alcohol, let's say you go to any bar in the world, you can find pretty much your favorite beer. So that beer has traveled a long way to get from A to B. That's why I think we should try to consume locally as much as we can. Because first of all, you're promoting local business and you're reducing the carbon footprint of the alcohol that you're drinking.
That's true. I mean, that's also something that we don't really necessarily think about, because like you said, you go into the bar and you're used to drinking a specific sort of beer. You'd be like, oh wow, this is obviously my obvious choice because I already like it. But to go to the extent of thinking of like, oh, if I did choose this beer, I'm going to contribute to the emissional footprint that I'm going to leave behind. So it is a big... And I've also started preferring to choose from local brands because not just does it feel good, but it's also more interesting because you get to choose the varieties that they make in that specific region. But yeah.
And stuff that I'd never even thought about before we started this episode was like the impact of, say, refrigeration and the amount of power that's used to keep alcohol cool, that's the amount of resources that are used for the packaging, the amount of energy that's used to produce glass, how much of it is actually recycled. And the carbon footprint is absolutely massive in all alcohols. For example, we were looking into how much the water footprint of producing alcohol. There's a cool website called waterfootprint.org, so I'm on it now.
We'll put a link in the description below so you can actually have a look at it.
And interestingly, as we mentioned in the previous episode, which is about dairy, if you haven't listened to that yet, please do check it out.
Deadly dairy.
The amount of water needed to produce 1 litre of milk is approximately 1,020 litres of water. So you're better off drinking alcohol.
Obviously.
Makes sense.
What a choice.
Perfect sense. I'd rather drink alcohol than milk.
Me too. Responsibly, though.
Responsibly.
Yes.
That is the keynote of this podcast today. So obviously you have to answer the most important question of the podcast, the only interesting question, the only interesting thing that we've actually talked about today. So, where this kind of concludes to is, if you're going to drink, and you want to drink responsibly, and which alcohol would you choose that is the most eco-friendly?
So we have been doing some research, and we haven't found that there isn't really a clear cut to what is the perfect choice. But there is one that stands out a little bit more than the others.
Yeah, I mean, there was some interesting stuff that we found out about cider, because cider is obviously produced from trees, and trees absorb carbon dioxide, so you can consider that as a positive impact. And apple orchards can be considered a more sustainable habitat as well for wildlife, rather than, say, barley, hops, corn, agave. And often people who produce cider, it's quite locally, and they use, for example, apples that are going off that aren't going to be sold. And even the process for making cider is a lot simpler than making other alcohols. But however, that doesn't necessarily mean that is the best vegan option.
No. There are some cider companies, obviously, that still tend to use animal agents for their processing.
Yeah, it's the same finding as the beer and the wine kind of things.
Yeah, that's true. But the fact that what we're saying about the ciders is that it has a far more environmental friendly approach to the ecosystem than, let's say, beer or wine had.
So we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode today. We hope we gave you a few different things to think about. I mean, this made me want to have a drink, to be honest, more than anything else.
Once or not?
No, it does make me want to have a drink right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we will probably crack a vegan-friendly beer, for sure. But once again, we'll be uploading our podcast every Sunday, so please make sure that you do tune in.
Yeah, tune in next week, a new episode. We hope you enjoyed today. We had a good time talking about it. We learned a lot in this process. We hope you're learning too. Episode 3 next week. See you guys around.
Take care. Love you all.